This is Unit 4, Homeostasis I. Homeostasis is one of those large overriding concepts that we have not just one unit on, but two in this course. And homeostasis is the maintenance of what's called a dynamic equilibrium. In chemistry, you may be familiar with equilibrium, where things kind of reach a steady state, and that's where they stop. And in living things, we never quite reach that steady state. So we're trying to maintain an equilibrium. Homeostasis is also an interaction between lots and lots of different variables, like stuff that's happening inside an individual organism, or they can things that are happening all over the Earth. So there's lots of ways we can talk about homeostasis, and we will in this unit. So the first idea here is that molecules move across membranes, and it's not that they just move one time across a membrane. Molecules are moving in response to concentration gradients, and they can be moving back and forth repeatedly. Sometimes the cell creates conditions where they do it all the time. Sometimes the cells are going to be trying to maintain a concentration gradient of 1 greater inside the cell than outside the cell. The most common kind of thing that you guys are familiar with is something called passive transport. And passive transport can simply be the movement of small nonpolar molecules across a membrane. Now, they have to be nonpolar because if you remember back to the membrane here, it has a phospholipid bilayer. The lipids are going to be nonpolar, and the phosphates are going to be polar. So inside of every cell there's going to be water, outside of every cell there's going to be water, and so the thing that separates inside and the outside is this membrane, and the membrane is going to separate out in polar from nonpolar molecules. So nonpolar molecules that are small can squeeze between the bases here and pass through the membrane, and they're going to move simply by diffusion. Now, sometimes we want particular molecules to get in. We don't really have a way for them to pass through, either because they're larger or because they're polar. And in that case, we have proteins which are going to be carrying out a job called facilitated diffusion. They're going to aid diffusion. They're going to be a facilitator. And these guys can make a membrane very permeable to particular kinds of molecules, or they make it slightly permeable to particular kinds of molecules. And basically, just there, they're going to be a protein that floats in the membrane. They're across the membrane itself, and they can either open and close, or they can be constantly open. And that is facilitated diffusion. And then finally, active transport. And active transport, obviously active, requires energy. The energy form that we always see is ATP. And ATP, again, is that universal energy molecule. And it's going to be donating a phosphate to this protein. And when it donates a phosphate to the protein, it causes the protein to change shape. And it's going to allow stuff to get moved through the membrane. Now, active transport is energy intensive. As a result of that, we are going to be having the organism only do that when required. So we're going to try to avoid that if we can. Right? Now there are some that's transport, and we also have osmosis to pay attention to, and we have 3 kinds of solutions here. The first kind of solution is a hypotonic solution. The second kind of solution is an isotonic solution, and the third kind of solution is a hypertonic solution. Now, like diffusion, where molecules are moving across, in osmosis, it's the water that's moving across. So you can see in this middle example right here, the amount of water coming in is equal to the amount of water coming out. That means that the concentration of water and solutes outside and inside the cell are equal, and the water is simply moving across by diffusion, moving back across. Some molecules may be doing the same thing, but we're mostly, in this case, worried about the water. So if this were a red blood cell and it's an isotonic solution, it's going to be very happy. See, it's got a little dent in the middle there. It looks like a little raft. Now, if we are in a hypotonic solution, so let's say that you are exercising and you think you need a lot of water. And let's say you don't actually need a lot of water, and you keep drinking and drinking and drinking, and your body cannot excrete that water, then your cells can find themselves in a hypotonic solution. And that is going to cause them to take in way more water than they would easily be able to handle, and as a result of that, they're going to swell and burst. So the concentration of water is greater outside than inside, and so as a result of that, water flows into the cell, very little flows out, and the cell can swell and burst. On the other hand, let's say it's a very salty kind of thing, and let's say you're a freshwater fish and you're being put in salt water. Now the concentration of water is actually greater inside the cell than outside the cell, and it's going to be having water leave the cell to try and equalize the concentration of water inside and outside. As a result, we're going to get the cell to shrivel. Now this can also happen in plants. It's just that we would call these guys turgid over here. Plants, if they take in too much water, it's not bad necessarily because they have methods of storing the water which are different than animals have. In this case here, they might not with too much water swell and burst, although you can drown the roots of your plants by having them constantly exposed to water. So those are movement of molecules across membranes, both molecules themselves and water. And that's diffusion and osmosis. All right, another form of active transport is called endocytosis. And in endocytosis, we're not just moving a few things, we're moving a lot of stuff, we're moving really big stuff. And we can see in this particular form of endocytosis called Pinocytosis, we're taking in these molecules in large quantities, and we actually pinch off the membrane. And as we do so, we form what's called a vesicle. And the vesicle then can be attached or attacked or surrounded by lysosomes or other molecules inside the cell, other organelles inside the cell that are going to allow it to take advantage of the stuff that's being taken in. Usually going to take in stuff here that you want. So in pinocytosis, we're maybe taking in nutrients. Maybe these are food molecules or water or liquids that have a molecule that we're looking for. You can see in this particular transmission electron microscope picture that we have lots and lots of these pinocytic vesicles coming in. All right, so that's a form of active transport. It is going to require energy to cause this membrane here to infold. It's going to require energy to break down whatever's in there, and it is an active form of active transport, a little bit different than what we saw on the other page. Okay, so we are talking about feedback here. You know that some organisms are what they call cold-blooded, exothermic, and we have other ones that are warm-blooded, they're endothermic. And we see in this picture right here that a river otter is what's called a temperature regulator. And it is going to be controlling its own body temperature. It's going to regulate its body temperature. And they're very much like us, so they have a stable body temperature. Largemouth bass, on the other hand, is a temperature conformer. It's an exotherm, and his body temperature is going to vary with the ambient temperature, the temperature of the fluid that surrounds it. And these are two different strategies. What's really good for the river otter is it can survive in a wide range of environments. As long as it can moderate its temperature, control its temperature, it can maintain homeostasis. The largemouth bass, its advantage is as long as its temperature, the environment is stable, then it requires very little energy to maintain its body temperature, and therefore it requires much less food. So a river otter has to eat lots and lots of fish to maintain its body temperature. So there's advantages and disadvantages to both of those. So when we talk about equilibrium here, this is let's say your body temperature or your blood glucose level, and this would be about the average. We can see that sometimes your body temperature is going to rise and fall, and as a result of that, you're going to get what's called negative feedback. So as your body temperature rises, what's going to happen is you are going to sweat, and that is going to cool your body down. And then it may be that your body temperature falls too much, and as a result of that, you're going to shiver, and you're going to go up and down and up and down. You're trying to maintain your homeostasis. It's just that it's never going to be static. All right. And so let's talk about temperature a little bit more. Here is an example. Your body temperature is getting higher. That's the stimulus. 37 degrees Celsius is about normal body temperature of the average person. And then that stimulus is going to send information to the brain, and then the brain is going to have a regulatory system in the hypothalamus. It's going to say, hey, it's hot out here. My body temperature is rising. And then it's going to send out a response, and that response, of course, is to sweat. So the stimulus is received or sensed by the body, and then there is an integrating center. In this case, it's the brain. That's going to be controlling it, and then it's going to stimulate a response, an effector. Now, let's say that you suffer from burns over large amounts of your body, and you don't have sweat glands. Then you are going to not be able to do a very good job of maintaining homeostasis in terms of your body temperature. So somebody who suffered from a lot of burns wants to avoid getting hot, and maybe exercising as much or exercising in warm weather because they don't have sweat glands. Be kind of similar to what would happen to a fish. If we took a fish, a cold water fish, and put them in a warm water, they would not be able to maintain their homeostasis because they don't have the effector. All right. Now, with negative feedback loops, they're going to have two slopes. They're going to be one is going to be if there's an increase, your body will respond to make it decrease, and if it's decreasing, it will respond to increase. Positive feedback loops, on the other hand, look very much like what you would see on math with your positive slope. Okay? Now, it's got an exponential curve to it, though, so it's a little bit different than the standard straight line. We have two examples for you. One of those is ethylene, and ethylene is a gas which is produced by fruits and vegetables when they're trying to ripen, and as they release that gas, they're going to cause more ripening to occur faster, and that releases more gas, and that increases the rate of ripening. You see this with apples. You've heard that phrase, one bad apple ruins the whole batch, and that bad apple is releasing lots and lots of ethylene, and it is causing the other apples to start to ripen more rapidly. So ethylene itself is typically really good. Kind of see the difference in the regression from the hard unripened tomato in this example up to the fully ripened one, but of course that continues on beyond that until it decays if you just leave it out. Regardless of whether you get fungus or bacteria around, it will over ripen and then it'll eventually decay. Bacteria and fungi will just speed up those processes. All right, so the same thing happens in women in childbirth. When the baby's head is pushing against the cervix, right down here, there are stretch receptors there that are going to send a signal, nerve signal to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is going to release a hormone to the pituitary, which is called oxytocin. The pituitary is going to release the oxytocin. The oxytocin actually makes the uterine wall contract, and it pushes from the top down, pushes the baby's head harder against the cervix. That sends a stronger signal to the hypothalamus. It releases more oxytocin. Contract, push, contract, signal, contract, signal, contract. So when a mother is having contractions and the contractions are increasing, the reason they're doing that is because of the positive feedback loop. So homeostasis involves both negative feedback, which is very common, and a few examples of positive feedback. But in positive feedback, the stimulus increases the response in the same direction. And in negative feedback, the stimulus is going to decrease the response or cause this response to go into the opposite direction. So there's a little bit of difference between positive and negative feedback loops there. All right, so now we also know that organisms are going to respond to changes in the external environment. And so really, most common examples of that you guys can think of would be, say, hibernation. So we have I think this is a mouse or a squirrel or something, and you can see that its typical metabolism is this gray or brown area right here, and then this is the additional metabolism it would require to stay active in wintertime when it's really cold. So instead what it does is it hibernates, and during that hibernation it has these really small bursts, or called arousals, and those are going to keep it awake and moving for a few minutes or a day every few days. And that is going to decrease the energy. Maybe it's going to allow it to excrete its waste products, and then it's going to go back and it's going to hibernate. So it's a strategy to save energy. So as the temperatures get colder, there's less food available, and you would need actually more food in order to stay active. So it's a lot better strategy to become very inactive and hibernate. And we have other levels of that. So you can see here as the outside temperature drops, the burrow temperature stays about the same, drops a little bit, and then we can just kind of stay in there. Our body temperature drops, and then it goes back up again during these arousal phases. So hibernation is a response to changes in the external environment. So not just stuff happening inside the cell, but also outside. In plants, we have what's called photoperiodism, and you can see here that we can get different kinds of short day plants and long day plants, and they are just basically responding to changes in the length of the day. And there has to be a particular length of day for a short day and long day for them to flower, and you can see through these examples when they're flowering and when they're not flowering. And it's pretty cool, but again, it's response to the external environment that's helping to maintain homeostasis. All right, so a couple other things that help maintain homeostasis are kinesis and taxis. And we'll talk about taxis first. Taxis is going to be something that you're going to see in all kinds of organisms where they are directional, they're moving towards something. Sometimes there's a geotaxis where they're moving towards a point on Earth. In the case of this particular fish right here, it is trout. It is basically facing upstream where the food is going to be coming from, and it is going to have what's called directional taxis. So if the river current's this way, it's going to be basically facing upstream. Now, kinesis, like we see with this bug here, is a little bit more random. It's non-directional, and the kinesis is basically going to be measured by two ways. If we have an area, if we have the kinesis occurring and we have a very high activity level, let's say there's humidity, and the temperature is rising, humidity is dropping, you may see this pill bug be very active. But then if it finds a moist place to stay, like you see in the picture where it's staying under a leaf, so it finds the leaf right here, it's like, oh, I like the temperature and the humidity here. Now the kinesis is slower. So outside here, slow. Alright, so inside here, slow, and then outside here, fast. So it's non-directional. It's not like it's, hey, I'm going to that leaf. It's like, hey, I'm just moving until I find a comfort level. So that's kinesis and taxis, and those are also going to be things that allow us to maintain homeostasis. All right, so this doesn't just happen on the individual cell level, it doesn't happen just on the organism level, it can happen in ecosystems too. So in populations, so in this case here we have the snowshoe hare and the Canadian lynx. And let me pull that up for you real quick here. The snowshoe hare is obviously the prey, and it is going to be preyed on by the lynx. And the population of the hare you can see here is both rising and falling, and then just out of sequence from that, just shifted a little bit in time, is the lynx, the prey or the predator. And you can see here that the lynx populations are almost always lower than the hare populations. As the lynx population grows, it causes the hare populations to fall. As the lynx population falls, the hare population grows. So that's just a simple example of predator-prey relationships, and that is just one interaction between between two biotic organisms. All right, this one right down here is red tide. And you are going to see a red tide occur. Very toxic usually. This is an algae that's going to grow. It's an algae bloom. And if we see these in the water right after this, we're going to see lots and lots of, or near land, we're going to see lots and lots of dead stuff. Fish wash up onto the beach, and any kind of marine life that's exposed to this red tide sucks all the oxygen out of the water, and it's very, very toxic. Releases these chemicals that can cause neurotoxins. So that's a red tide. And red tides occur when you have an excess of nutrients and a high temperature. And so if we have lots of sewage waste going out into the water and very warm temperatures during the summertime, then risks of red tide exploding are pretty good. And then, of course, we also have our friend global warming, and we've seen increases in or effects of global warming on our environment, both actual and predicted. One of those is that we're having more frequent and severe temperature weather events, like tornadoes and hurricanes, and then we can also get sea level rise, so low-level areas might get flooded. What are we going to see here in Georgia is most likely an increase in temperature, shorter winters, drier winters, more storms in the springtime, summertime area, and just basic changes to the temperature that make us feel very uncomfortable. Throughout the rest of the world, the vast majority of people live near water and live near coasts, and it's going to be much more strongly impacting them, at least initially. All right, so now the next one I think we're going to talk about here is homeostatic mechanisms, and these are going to be examples of common ancestry. Now, we haven't talked about evolution yet. We're going to do that pretty quickly, but we can also see here that If I have organisms that share a cardiovascular system in common, then they probably shared a common ancestor. And if we look at the cardiovascular systems of different species, like we see here between fish, amphibian, and reptile, or fish, amphibian, and mammal, that we go from a simpler two-chambered heart to a more complex three-chambered heart to a mammalian heart which has 4 chambers. And as the heart becomes more complex, it's also capable of supporting larger and more complex organisms. And they all have the same structure, so they have the heart, the blood vessels, and arteries, capillaries, veins, and they have the same function, which is to deliver oxygen and nutrients to the cells and to take away waste products and carbon dioxide. And so as a result of that, that means that if we have those things in common or similarity, it means we have both common ancestry and a way to see how things diverge. And it's the same thing over here with one of my favorite examples, which is urea and uric acid. And now, the thing that most animals want to do is they want to get rid of their nitrogen waste, their ammonia. And how they spend their time getting rid of their nitrogen waste is based partly on their mode of living and partly on how much energy they have available. So if we looked at 3 different organisms, a fish, a mammal, and a bird, what we'd see with a fish is that they live in water. And so ammonia, which is highly toxic, is going to be put into a very large container of water, a lake or a stream or an ocean even, and they don't really have to worry so much about getting rid of their nitrogen waste as ammonia. It's a very simple conversion, very low energy. So again, just like with body temperature, their excretion of nutrient or waste products like urea or ammonia, is going to be less energy intensive than we would see in other organisms. So fish can live on far less energy and not have as sophisticated a kidney excretion system because they live in water. Now mammals have to carry their water with them. Mammals and animals have to carry their water with them because they're primarily land-based. And as a result of that, they have 2 different strategies. Mammals are going to take that those proteins, their ammonia, and they're going to process it into some slightly more complex molecules like urea. Now that takes water. And with mammals, we produce a fair amount of urine. You're going to produce a liter or 2 of urine every day. And that's a significant amount. Obviously, smaller animals produce less. But it is more energy intensive and it requires that we excrete water, but the ammonia doesn't float around in our body and it is not quite so toxic. Now you may have seen bird poop and said it's kind of white runny stuff and thought to yourself, oh, that's gross, that's poop. Well, it's actually mostly uric acid. And you can see from the structure right down here that the uric acid is very, very complex compared to the urea or the ammonia. And the reason for that is because the bird requires lots and lots of energy to carry around water, and it doesn't want to do that. So instead, what they're going to do is they're going to use a lot of energy to make these complex but less toxic molecules called uric acid, and then they're going to just poop those out. And you're going to see that everywhere where you see that white pasty stuff, that's going to be a combination of poop and uric acid. And it doesn't require as much energy, it doesn't require as much water, but it requires a lot more energy. So the gradient goes from no energy, very low energy, and very lots of water to moderate amount of energy and a fair amount of water to high levels of energy and very little water. So those are 3 things that are adaptations by these organisms to different environments, and they reflect, again, an ancestry and divergence from that ancestor. Okay, and finally, disruptions to dynamic homeostasis. And so there's several examples that we're going to give you. The first example is dehydration. So we see dehydration in babies, and the babies are going to be examined and showing this because maybe they're sick. Maybe they've got diarrhea. That's the most common way they get dehydrated. And you can actually tell the baby can't say, hey, I'm thirsty. They're just going to have these behaviors and then these physical characteristics. So when you pinch their skin, it's going to kind of drop back down slowly, and you're going to see them be very less active, sunken eyes. You may see capillaries, they pinch their fingers like this right here, and the blood may not flow back into them very quickly. So all kinds of stuff is going to happen with the babies as a result of dehydration. So that's an individual thing. And you can also see the same thing with mercury poisoning. Now, we don't really have too many cases of mercury poisoning, but if we did have them in humans, these would be the kinds of characteristics that you would see. It's more a problem that you're going to see in other animals, especially top-level predators. And that is body's responses to the toxin that they're trying to get rid of. Now, you probably recognize this as kudzu, and you know that kudzu are an invasive species, and you know that they're basically choking off the life of other organisms. So, as an invasive species, they're going to be causing disruptions to the homeostasis of the organisms that they are basically growing on. And you can see kudzu everywhere. It grows really well here. Unfortunately, kind of out of control. One you probably don't know so well is the fact that Georgia has a real big problem with feral pigs. And these feral pigs right here, they are going to be doing stuff like rooting up your grass in your yard. And they're really highly intelligent organisms. And they learn where food sources are. They learn how to avoid predators. And they can get some super big ones. You may want to look up some of the world's largest feral pigs. I think there's one in Georgia that was shot that was like 1,900 pounds. It's huge. It's gigantic. All right, so these guys here are going to be affecting the homeostasis of the systems where they've been introduced to, places where they're not normally supposed to be, and that's going to cause the environment to have its homeostasis disrupted. So remember, homeostasis can be small, in a single cell, or it can be the organism, or it can be populations, or it can be the ecosystem, or it can be the biosphere. So there are all levels that we can talk about for homeostasis. And we'll go ahead and stop right there for today, and we'll talk to you later.